listeners, and welcome to a Geek Tragedy, yet another podcast from this endless well of knowledge. I'm Stephen, known online as Plague Mantle for various reasons, and I am your host. And I would like to welcome to the pod the most erudite human and my best friend, Holly Properly. Hey Holly, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you.
You're looking very comfortable in your... What is that, jumper?
It's a cardigan.
Cardigan.
Yes, it has a long and well, it doesn't have a long and interesting history. I bought it from some lady on Vinted who made it. You know, it's cozy and comfy, and it makes me feel like I'm in the middle of a packet of Starburst, which is quite cheerful.
It is, and I see you've introduced us to your yellow chair more personally. If you were watching last week, and if you weren't watching last week, Holly was sitting far away on her sofa, and now they're sitting much closer on their yellow chair.
Yes, I thought it might be a bit of a benefit, mainly because I can actually see the screen if I'm sat here. Last week I was sort of having to squint at what was going on, so I thought it would be better this way. And also it's much comfier. Yeah.
No, Sully?
Like he is sleeping on a cushion just over there in the other part of my living room. For now.
Waiting to pounce.
There is no doubt in my mind that he will annoy me at some point during this podcast.
Well, in which case I'll move on, seeing as Sully's not to introduce, and move us on to our very own salvaged man and crafter par excellence, Mark Cordory.
Hello.
Hello, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much. I've had a fun time since last we recorded and met on these hallowed electronic devices. Over the weekend, I was pirating with mates at the Plymouth Pirate Weekend, which was great. And yeah, drinking and pirating and taking out my little rat puppet to scare the children. I only made 3 children cry this time. I was a little bit disappointed. But I do.
What's the most children you've ever made cry with a puppet?
I think last year I wasn't up to double figures, but I was over 3. I was certainly over 3. It's the thing is, parents will go, "Oh, look at this," and occasionally I'm like quite close to them, and like this oblivious young child in a pushchair will suddenly turn around and be confronted by this little rat thing which they don't understand, and there's this sort of pause, and then there's the realization that they're looking at something that they don't understand and it's far too close to them, and occasionally the parents are pushing them closer, and
then you'll terribly throttle the parents to death in front of them with the rat.
Yeah, well, no, occasionally it'll just like tip over into full-blown tears. But I've learnt to read the fear in a child's eye.
That's not a sentence that you hear very often.
No, maybe not. Maybe I could have rephrased that, but it is true.
Sometimes, you know, maybe court recorders hear that kind of stuff. But
no, you can see in a child's eyes goes, "I'm not sure about this," and you go, "He's not sure about that." And then you go, "I really don't want you to come any closer." I think I'd probably better not come any closer. So most of the time, you manage to read those signs of flight or fight.
Let's steer away from the terrifying of children. And would I be right in saying, I mean, not that you'd ever mention this yourself out loud more than 2 or 3 times a minute, but did I not see some of your kit on television, or at least in the newspapers this week?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so some of my kit ended up on a big promo event for Furiosa, which was I think it was the Jimmy Kimmel show, which is the American chat show, and they had George Miller and Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth turn up, surrounded by fellow Wasteland Weekenders who had been roped in to do a big promotional bit. So Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth got brought in on a back of a motorised chariot, and the guy, riding the chariot,
dragged by you,
was wearing one of my masks, and then my Wasteland Priestess costume got a bit of screen time as well. So
very cool.
That was quite nice. So
it was.
I'm in Furiosa by proxy.
I actually quite enjoyed the way that you said, like, I think it was on the Jimmy Kimmel show, as though you hadn't mentioned it 10 times already today. I think if I recall correctly,
Yes, Steve.
Love it.
Oh, by the way, something else. If we're on interesting, colourful knitted things, Look at my bedspread.
I do really like that
I'm
bedspread.
loving the Doctor
It's
Who.
good,
The
isn't
Doctor
it?
Who pillow is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. I like that.
Both the bedspread and the Doctor Who pillow were gifts, housewarming gifts from friends.
Aww.
So, there you go.
Nice. Well, I can't show that kind of stuff up. I can show you this 1923 camera that I picked up, which is a fully working, wind-up
Merchant.
16mm film camera,
No.
which I scooped up.
Podcasts, largely
Church shop.
audio.
That's why I'm saying. That's why I'm describing it as a 1923 cinema camera, fully working for 16mm film, which picked up for a very small price from a charity
You
shop.
did.
Very nice. Very pleased with that.
What are you going to do with it?
I'm going to use it to film some stuff for my Cthulhu game, so I can do some films. The players can find the film and play it back on a
Can you
projector.
still get 16mm? Did you say it was
Yeah,
16
you can
mil?
get the film. So it comes in like 100 meter or feet. I can't remember, like
Feet.
length.
Feet.
But it won't go in the camera. It needs to be chopped down to 50 feet, and I'm getting that done. I need to 3D print the device which will rewind the film, but then I'll use a modern day projector to project it because the old one's just not really good enough. But yeah, so I'm going to use it as a like players can find it in my Cthulhu game and then play back some interesting film that I would have made.
Fantastic.
It's going to be terrifying. I just know that. I just know that no matter what it is and how light-hearted it might start out, it will be deeply, deeply terrifying, probably on a number of levels.
Anyway, we should probably move on because we're gonna just saying hello. I've been up to stuff, but as well as me and of course Holly and Mark behind the scenes, our long-suffering producer Kit is busy probably just sleeping because he's found this new tech that lets him film this and record this without redoing anything. So yeah, he's probably asleep, and we'll wake up somewhere at the end, hopefully, turn us off and then edit everything. Kit, who shall be named Kit.
Ooh, Kit!
Hey,
Yeah. So this is episode 1. We had episode 0 last week where we did the introductions and what we're going to be doing. And if you listened to that, that's great. If you didn't, I recommend going back and listening to it because we brought you up to speed on the new show and the format and what we're working in, as well as sort of brought you up to speed on what we've been doing. Although there's obviously been new stuff this week. There is a British Museum's worth of knowledge that we have collectively looted from our lives. We are keen to chat about and to divulge to the world. And we spent a lot of time last episode reminiscing about the geekiest things that we did in our interim period between larping up that hill and a Greek tragedy. One of the big things about that, one of the things we talked about a lot, was Mark's experience of going to see D&D the movie, which was one of his highlights of his hiatus from podcasting. You had a lot of fun. You really enjoyed that. We talked about it a lot, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the geekiest thing that I could think of at the time.
I thought it was a really odd thing to find as the geekiest thing you did, but when we talked about it, we had so much to say, about what an experience it was for all of us. It really kind of got us talking about media that had hopped not just from tabletop to the big screen, but like to all medias. And in today's Wanderings, as we kind of amble from topic to topic, we're going to kick off what is potentially a long discussion that will definitely kind of spread out over several weeks of chatting. That very phenomena of how things that we enjoy in one format that we discover in either in a PC game or by listening to a bit of music or a hand-me-down from our parents or whatever has skipped its way into different forms of media that we've learned to enjoy elsewhere. You kind of get that feeling of excitement when it's being turned into a film, and that ultimate disappointment when you watch that film. Or sometimes it is great joy, and we wanted to talk about that, so we will. And at the end, we will have, gentle listeners, some updates for you about our project that we are swinging our way into. So stay tuned just for that. Don't listen to the crap in between. Don't listen to us talk about this stuff. Just wait to the end.
No, absolutely do listen to the crap in between,
We are the
please.
crap in between.
That's another great battle cry. I can read the fear in the eyes of children. We are the crap in between.
That's actually
Very-
a really good punk band name, isn't it?
What
The crap
we can
in
read the fear in
between.
the eyes of children.
No, that would be an album title, Reading the Fear in Children's Eyes, but then, like, the band would be called The Crap in Between.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. So, you probably had enough of listening to my dulcet tones for a little while, gentle listeners, because I've done the majority of the talking for the minute. So I'm gonna go around our small group of gloop. Yes, my small gloop of flippers. I don't know what that is, but it sounds fun. And I'm going to ask you to explain your favouriteest of things that we have just outlined. So the one that really stands out in your head, Mark, you picked for us.
Well, after a lot of debate, because there's so much that I could go. That was a great adaptation. It's really nice to see that done well. But having had to nail it down to one, I've gone for an absolute classic. Well, in my mind, it's an absolute classic, which is Douglas Adams's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which has been translated into so many different formats. I've got a list here. Start off as a radio show, which is how I first heard it. The first series was broadcast on BBC Radio 1978, March, so I would have been 16 years old, which dates me. And it was the most wonderful thing I'd ever heard up to that point. And that's how it started, it was a radio show, but then it quickly became a novelisation, and it also became a pretty good TV show, BBC TV series.
Because the novel was 79, wasn't it? Came out like the year after.
Yeah, the radio, that's kind of like a weird starting point for something which has become so well known. Was it started off as a radio show? It didn't start off as a book or a computer game or any of that, but it became all those things afterwards. So yeah, on the success of the radio show, Douglas Adams wrote the novelisation, and then there was a comic book at some point. I've never heard of that, but apparently on the list, comic book. It was also a computer text game at some point. Probably
and you can still play that on the BBC.
Yeah, you can.
On the BBC website, you can still play it. Yep, because I have failed miserably at it, like on more occasions than I can count.
Oh, I've never played that. I should give that a go. Yeah. Yeah, the TV series was great. And then we had the movie adaptation, and it was just all a very pants as far as I was concerned. It was just like, no, that's wrong, no, that's wrong. But the thing about The Hitchhiker's Guide is that because it started off as a radio show, like reading a book, I guess, is that you got these mental images in your head of what everything was and who everybody was. Also enhanced by the radiophonic workshop, because it was the first BBC radio show to be done in stereo, and apparently they spent a very large portion of the radio budget on the sound effects, and it really shows, because I still think out of all the versions of Hitchhiker's Guide that there have been, the radio show has the best special effects. Yeah, it's just such a wonderful format to start off with.
Did you own it on audio?
Yeah, I've got all of them, even the one that was written with Douglas Adams's leftovers by I can't remember. It's an Irish comedian, but he kind of wrote another story based on scraps that Douglas Adams had left behind. But yeah, I've listened to every single one. I mean, what are the 5-6 series, I think, in total. It does become diminishing returns, but I think the first 3 series are really good. The second series is probably my favourite. I think it's kind of difficult to beat. I mean, out of all those formats, it's even become a number. I mean, when you say 42, everybody thinks of the meaning of life. And that's a pretty big legacy when you can nail an individual number and just say that number and everybody will know what you're talking about.
So when it stepped from being like a radio show to a TV show, how excited were you as a young man?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it was actually pretty good. I mean, okay.
They recast. It was most of the same cast, wasn't it? But they recast.
It was Ford
Sandra
Prefect,
Dickinson,
and that was played by David Dixon in the TV series, but it was Jeffrey McGivern in the radio.
Yep. Because I know they put Sandra Dickinson in because she wasn't originally Trillian, was she?
I've got all the cast here. It was Susan Sheridan was in the original radio show.
I know the TV show cast, but I can't remember. Well, I mean, obviously they're mostly the same, but yeah. But yeah, that must be quite because it was in the old days, obviously, because it's TV back in the 80s, wasn't it? So like you couldn't binge it; you had to wait every week for the episodes to come out.
You did, yeah, absolutely. And I think they did a really good job. I mean. They attempted Zaphod Beeblebox with 2 heads and 3 arms on a BBC budget.
It was so bad.
Well, was it for the time? I think Zaphod's second head took up a huge chunk of budget for the show. Because, and I remember he was on Blue Peter. They were showing off Zaphod's second head on Blue Peter as a technological marvel, and yeah, it is a bit shit. Well, it's very shit by today's standards.
It's generous, though, isn't it?
But they did it, and what I found, one of the many things I found really disappointing by the Hollywood big budget movie, was that they could, with that budget and with the technology we have now or had back then. They could have done a really good Zaphod Beeblebox. They could have really gone for that second head. They could have done the whole thing. But they basically decided to make Sam Rockwell look like a normal person. And occasionally his head would flip back and there'd be another head underneath his chin. And it was just... Even the BBC on their minimal budget at least made an effort to try and make Zaphod Beeblebox the way he was described in the radio and books. And I think there's a lot of Douglas Adams was writing for the medium of radio, and it's just, I can do anything I want. I don't have to worry about budget. I can just write anything I want. So he did the most outlandish things he could think of. And they were fantastic, but to translate those onto the screen, I mean, that became a real challenge. But yeah, I think the BBC one was quite good.
That must have been a bit of a bum because, like, sorry, Holly, go on. You go.
No, I was just going to say that's the thing, isn't it? You know, the original format is the one that kind of determines how things can be adapted, you know? Because if you're writing for radio, you can basically say anything and describe anything, because then it's on the listener to use the power of their mind to really kind of get in there and visualize things. But then if you suddenly, you know, have a guy with 2 heads and 3 arms, like putting him into TV is going to cause your prop department some problems. You know, so like the original format, I think, has a massive say in which formats things can be adapted for. Which is really interesting.
Well, I think.
Well, I was going to say that. I was going to say that I was going to just follow up on the point of what you're saying earlier as well. That Douglas Adams, obviously, he did a lot of Doctor Who work. So before he did Hitchhikers, so you can almost imagine him kind of going, "Man, every time I write a Doctor Who script, the prop department fucks us up royally. So I'm going to write a radio play." And then it goes straight back to the guys that were making Doctor Who, and they make out, and they bring out the props. Because I'm like, fucking hell,
you bastard, Douglas Adams. But what Holly was saying is like the original format. But I think the radio, in exactly the same way as books, you can create whatever you want, and it's in the reader or the listener's mind. You know, they create the images, but with radio you've got the added benefit that you've got sound effects to go with it. And I think the BBC Radiophonics Workshop, was it Terry Kingsland? Can't remember his first name, but he did some amazing stuff, and say the first time in stereo for BBC radio show. So it was groundbreaking in many ways, and I think it's very much deserving of a mention in a product which has just been translated into so many different formats and also into apparently 30 different languages as well.
Wow. I'm really looking forward to getting messages from you, Mark, and then like the next like few days when you try and play that game, and just like it's so difficult.
Okay.
It's honestly so difficult. But then again, you probably know, because I've only ever read it and listened to the audiobook of it and seen the terrible movie.
Okay.
Which is terrible. I mean, even Alan Rickman couldn't save that.
He couldn't save it.
Well, there was, apart from Alan Rickman, there was one other perfect bit of casting, and only the one, which was Slarty Bartfast in the movie, played by Bill Nye. And I thought, he nailed it. But apart from that, sorry, Holly, carry on.
No. I was like that. That was the. So that's sort of the only kind of. I've never heard the radio play. I've tried to play the game.
Please, Holly, do me a favour. Do yourself a favour. Get the radio show out, because it is wonderful.
I will.
It's absolutely glorious. Yeah.
I absolutely will. But yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to getting frustrated messages from you when you try and play the game and it doesn't work.
In terms of the text game, do you have to have a knowledge of the Hitchhiker's Guide for it to be really playable without problems?
I've got reasonably far in it, as in like I've gotten to the pub. I've been run over by the bulldozer a few times.
Okay, that's not reasonably far. That's right at the very beginning.
No,
okay.
No, I know. But it feels like reasonably far because everyone that I've ever spoken to, that's ever played it as well has got about that far before
I've finished it, but I played it when I was a kid.
Of course you have. But like, this is sort of now, and And
the answers, the House of Complete were in the back of Amsterdam Action magazine, so...
Oh, well, I mean, I was doing it completely blind, so I'm actually quite proud of myself.
You get stuck. Nowadays, you just go online and look for a walkthrough. Back in those days, you had to wait for the next part to come out in Amsterdam Action. And then you could read it and go, okay, I can move on. But, I mean, generally speaking, you can wait a week, so you just talked about it at school and did it that way.
Ah, fair enough.
But that's still text-based. Because I was going to say as well, we were talking about Sandra Dickinson being in Hitchhikers. Her husband, Peter Davison, was the dish of the day, wasn't he? As well.
Oh, who was Peter? Was he the dish of the day?
He was the dish of the day. He was
yes, of course. Sorry, at the restaurant at the end of the universe. I thought you were just talking generally, like, boy, he was well dishy. But yeah, okay.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I'm glad it's not just me.
Well, I'm a big Doctor Who fan, so Peter Davison. Woo!
Oof, that Peter Davison.
Oh, lass, I do declare. But I just suddenly remembered that he was in it because it just popped into my phron. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, classic bit of work. Like, you're quite right. Humorous sci-fi Doctor Who fans as well. That his humour is all the way is interlaced in Doctor Who at that period, and then how it reproduced
Tom
kind of
Baker episode, wasn't it?
It was
storyline that he did. But I think that Terry Pratchett probably owed quite a bit to Douglas Adams, because I think you've got Douglas Adams covering sci-fi, and I think he did try a different genre as well, and then you've got Terry Pratchett covering fantasy, but Terry Pratchett also tried sci-fi once, but it wasn't a patch on his Discworld stuff.
And I feel like, because at the moment, Stephen and I are both reading the same series of books, but he's way ahead of me, because I was reading something about the history of cults at the time, and I feel like Ben Aranovich, who is the writer of the Rivers of London series, is very similar. Like, it's that very sort of dry, sardonic, self-deprecating.
He wrote Doctor Who as well.
He did, yeah. But I mean, I love the fact that all of that, you can tell British comedy, fantasy, sci-fi writers, you can tell from their humour, like where they've come from, where they've got those influences from.
They've all grown up with it. So, like, I love the fact that when you're, and this is a bit off point, but when you're reading anyone, particularly British people, and they always reference, the stuff they love when they're kids, and it's always stuff like Doctor Who, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They all talk about it, and now you're reading Ben Aranovich, and he's talking about Terry Pratchett and that kind of stuff. And it's just in his stories, he's just going, My characters live their lives in modern day London. They're going to talk about how much they love Doctor Who and Terry Pratchett and all this, and it's beautiful. It's great. So sci-fi classics. Let's move from sci-fi classics and glide seamlessly into the extremely familiar genre to sci-fi classics that Holly wants to talk about, because obviously geeking out about stuff is geeking out about stuff. Geek tragedies are what they are, and your tragedy is born from a book called Hillary.
Rebecca.
Sorry, it's a running joke. I've got to do it. Which you've selected for your own reason. So I'm not even going to start driving into that. I'm going to let you tell me about Rebecca. Tell me about what it is and why you love it.
So I want to caveat this first off by saying that I'm pretty certain that a lot of people that know me would have expected me to have chosen Wuthering Heights, because it's been adapted so many times into so many different formats. There's a ballet, there's a song by Kate Bush or someone, and never
I
heard.
missed the Back to the Day so much.
I'm sure I can come up with one at some point. And it's my favorite book. The song's by my favorite artist, but there is something about Rebecca that has just stuck with me for years and years and years. It was written originally as a novel by Daphne du Maurier, she of Jamaica Inn and The Birds and other classics. But Rebecca's probably one of her most well-known works, and it was picked up in 1940 by a director that not a lot of people have heard of, actually. His name's Alfred Hitchcock. I don't know if rings any bells.
Not familiar.
Alfred Hitchcock? No.
Is he in porn?
Absolutely not, no. Alfred
He
Hitchcock,
did like the Birds,
he did. Now, the Daphne du Maurier Hitchcock collaboration, you see.
There you go.
Hitchcock obviously is one of the seminal directors of the 40s and 50s. His work is just incredible, and he picked up Rebecca, and it became one of the most incredible films of its generation. Even now, it's considered to be a classic, and it's one of my favorite films of all time.
My mum loved it.
It's just phenomenal. But for some context, Rebecca is written from the perspective of an unnamed young woman who is a lady's companion. She is on holiday with the lady that she works for, and she meets a mysterious man called Maxim de Winter, who in the 1940s film was played by Laurence Olivier, so it had the proper full-on gravitas that you would sort of expect from anything that Laurence Olivier did, which is very exciting. The young woman was Joan Fontaine, and they had a wonderful, wonderful chemistry that was slightly sort of it was romantic to a point, but then it was also sort of quite kind of, like tutor mentee kind of, I don't know. Watch the movie.
Less seeing the fear in the eyes of children kind of thing.
Hello, Sixpence.
It's only his tail.
Sixpence is one of the resident podcast cats.
He is. He's one of the Geek Tragedy cats. Hello, Sixpence. So Rebecca is the story of the unnamed young woman who becomes the second Mrs. De Winter after Rebecca, Maxim De Winter's first wife, disappears. She is originally thought to have died by suicide, but then towards the end of the book, it turns out that she goaded Maxim De Winter into murdering her, sealing her body inside the cabin of her little boat, and then sinking the boat. And that's one of the reasons that I picked Rebecca for this conversation, because the 1940s was a very censored time in film in America, and in order to be able to make Rebecca into a film, Hitchcock had to change the ending so that it would get past the censors. So in the book, Rebecca is murdered by her husband, and
Spoilers.
It was written in 1938. The statute of spoilers has long since passed. And in the movie in the 1940s, it had to be changed so that her death was an accident, because you couldn't have a leading man murder somebody and get away with it. And in the books, he murders somebody. There is an inquiry, and he is deemed to be not guilty of this, despite having admitted the whole thing. So, in the States at that time, you couldn't have that. It was not allowed, and so that kind of became what everybody thought it was about. And because the Hitchcock film gained so much traction and it was so famous, a lot of people, when they read the book, were then quite upset by the fact that he'd actually murdered her, because they liked Laurence Olivier, and they didn't want to think about characters that he was playing being, murdering bastards. And it's just, it has both the book and the movie, and I think that it's one of the very few adaptations where I don't have a preference between the two. Usually, I'm all for the original format is always the best. It's very rare, especially books to movies, that I'm completely happy, because unless it's word for word what's in the book, I'm not going to be happy at all, because I'm a book purist. And if it's not the exact script, then
That's weird though, because like Mark's example is something that he listened to on the radio when he was growing up, and then came out on TV. So there's an expectation of like, what's it going to be like and stuff. But both the book and obviously the film were made long before you were even conceived, or your parents were conceived. In the case of like the book, which is never going out of print, is it?
No, never.
Never out of print.
No.
So, like, which way around did you read it first and then watch it? I take it.
No, I watched it first. My mum is a huge Hitchcock fan.
So I was going to say, like, did you read it and then like get really excited there might be a film? But of course, did you watch it and then get really excited that someone had written a book? Is less.
No, to be honest, it's more me though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very you.
It's very much more me. Like, I watch a film and then I discover that it's an adaptation. I'm right there for that. Can I read more about this? But no, my mum's a huge Hitchcock fan, so I grew up with my mum watching Hitchcock movies, watching Bette Davis and Joan Crawford,
Tippi Hedren.
And Tippi Hedren. So I grew up, rainy Sundays with old movies, and I watched it first, and it terrified the living pants off me. There's an opening.
Living pants, don't I?
There's the opening to the movie is Joan Fontaine saying, "Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again," and the visual is just this old building that has been ravaged by fire, and these gates just open and there's nothing, and it's quite obviously now that when you look at it when you're older, it's a model that's been backlit and it's beautiful, it's incredibly well done, but it was terrifying. And there's something about black and white movies when you're
small,
a kid that's grown up with, especially when you've grown up with colour TV, that just adds that extra air of mystery. You're right. For me, it was Tale of Two Cities, that kind of stuff. That was, those kind of, and the models and the way it was done. You're absolutely right. The colour takes so much away from them. Not I can really see it, but the texture of the shots are very, very different. Yeah, that's it.
Being an old bastard, I grew up with black and white. Those were all my early films that I saw as I grew up. Yeah. They were all in black and white, so it's no novelty to me.
And I think there's so much that you could, like, Hitchcock proves how much you can do with light, with texture, when you're filming for something that's black and white. And I think it's a huge, it's just an incredible movie, and the adaptation is done so well, despite the fact that it had to be changed to actually be able to be created. And then you look at the 2020 adaptation, and everything just falls apart.
Before you get to that, which I didn't even know existed, so like I was going to drive along that road in a second, but you watched the film first, you said, which is It's kind of cool. And as Mark was saying earlier, when the first you listen to it on radio, you get these impressions in your head, and then you see it. So you watch it on TV, at home, and you're watching it. You're getting really involved, and it's beautiful because you've got that experience, as you were just saying. You're sucked into the TV. The sets are great. It's beautiful. And then you read it, right? And all of that is playing in your head, so everything is there. I've done this, it's all there. But how much different did you find it in the book when you read it? How much change for you was there?
Aside from the ending, the very obvious, the very obvious ending, it's so similar. It's unbelievably similar, and I think that's one of the really beautiful things about older adaptations. I think newer adaptations take a lot more
I don't know what you mean, because
liberties.
When we get to discuss it later, obviously the 3 Hobbit films are exactly the same as the book. So
don't you start me on that.
Me neither. Don't go there, Stephen. They'll be ranting.
Where did those battle sheep come from? Where were they? They weren't anywhere.
When mummy battle sheep and the daddy battle sheep love each other very much.
Oh, don't you start that with me. No, but I mean, I feel like there were fewer, because there were fewer things to adapt around. The adaptations had to be more faithful. Yeah. And so when you're reading, obviously, you can see the actors, because that's the film is the picture that you build up first if you watch the film first. So you can see Laurence Olivier, you can see the parts of the movie that match up, you can see Judith Anderson doing the most incredible and scary Mrs. Danvers that has ever existed. And bless her, I love Kristen Scott Thompson, but she did that really badly.
Mrs. Danvers from Monk.
No, not Mrs. Danvers, the random housekeeper that was in a single episode of Monk. No!
We only mentioned this because we watched it the other day. It's not a really random, obscure fact that I know.
There's an interesting thing here.
We both know.
There's an interesting thing here, because you're saying that early adaptations into into the big screen were relatively faithful to the original source material, and I would say that only relatively recently productions are starting to get back to that being relatively faithful to the source material. But we went through decades of loosely inspired by, but here's our own interpretation of it, which were deeply, deeply disappointing. I mean, think of War of the Worlds. Yeah, how many adaptations have been done like that?
I think we should do a whole pod on War of the Worlds.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't want to get into it now, but it was just as when Holly was saying, the early adaptations were quite faithful. And I was thinking, well, we went through a whole period where they were really
You can argue now that people are writing 4 books to be adapted to TV and film anyway. A lot of the modern writers are just waiting for their stuff to...
But I mean, you need to look at things like basically everything that I loved when I was a child, for better or for worse, that became adapted into movies in the early 2000s are terrible. They're awful because so many liberties were taken with the source material, and we'll just expand that there, and we'll just take this character out and make it this character instead. And so the people that have read the book, see, the thing is I think that it used to be that adaptations were kind of supplemental. They were kind of, if you've read the book, now go and see the movie. It was very much kind of that the expectation was there that you would have read the book and then you would go and see the movie.
That whole concept that, my God, look, the thing you've read can be on the big screen.
Exactly. Look at Laurence Olivier play, look at Laurence Olivier. He's going to be this man that you've read about in this book. How wonderful, how, vibrant, how terrifying this will be. And now the expectation is that you can basically just bung it on Netflix, like they did with the 2020 adaptation of Rebecca, and say, it doesn't matter if you haven't read the book, because not only are we going to do all of the exposition in the trailer, but we're also, we're going to change it.
That's a horribly accurate statement about so many things, isn't it?
Isn't it? But at the same time, we're just going to change it so much that actually, it doesn't, don't worry about reading the book, because they're two completely different things.
Holly,
they're not supplemental anymore. Yes.
The most recent adaptation, did he turn out to be a murderer again? Do they put it back to him being a murderer?
So they do, but they do it in a very they do it in a very strange way. I haven't seen it all the way through because it was terrible.
You threw the controller at the TV.
Oh, honestly, it was. I was very, very angry. But basically, so the whole premise of Rebecca is that at the end of the novel, you find out that Rebecca, who everyone thought had died in an accident and had actually been shot by her husband, you found out that a few days before she was shot, she went to a doctor and she discovered that she was terminally ill. So she goaded her husband into killing her instead of having that slow, painful death from terminal illness that you would have had in the early 1900s. And that is that's the big, that's sort of the big reveal, is that actually he's not, is he really that bad? Did he know? Did there's a lot of moral ambiguity.
That's like
kind of going on.
By M. Night Shyamalan. Here's the twist.
Okay.
She was going to die anyway.
Okay.
But in the 2020 adaptation, they have the inquiry, and it's a very public inquiry, and it's very sort of big and huge. And again, it turns out that he's acquitted of the thing because the second Mrs. De Winter sleuths herself off in detective mode to the doctor and finds out very stealthily all of these things that happen. But the biggest, most awful thing that they did, and I will let you change the subject in a second, Stephen.
Well,
I'm really
we're almost
sorry,
out of time for the show.
Oh no! Oh god. Okay. So, but in the book, Manderley burns down. The house burns down, and you don't really kind of get a lot of closure on how that happened. In the 2020 adaptation, they show Mrs. Danvers running around throwing gasoline on everything and actually striking a match and then dancing around in the fire. And I find that to be an absolute travesty of, I can't even call it cinema,
Well,
it's just a travesty of the
maybe
eyes.
the actress who played Mrs. Danvers in the 2020 adaptation just got fed up with the adaptation and tried to burn down the set, and they filmed it.
It was Kristen Scott Thompson. She's usually very good. I don't know what.
Like I said, I didn't know it existed until you mentioned it earlier.
Don't watch it.
I wasn't going to.
Good.
Stephen, do you have anything to talk about?
Not anymore. Holly can't take visual or verbal cues for like.
You've got 18 minutes left, mate. Cram it in.
I'm so sorry.
I'm kidding. We're all good. That's cool. It's big. It's very nice to just like talk about like the two close-endedness of like just a book and a TV film. Yeah, that's quite nice. 'Cause it is the classic way of as we'd watch stuff when we were kids. It would be books and the films and stuff. It was good. But for me, mine's a bit of an odd journey because I want to talk about something that I followed the trail of where it had come from rather than watching it grow from something, because when in the 90s when I was in my late hundreds, there was a cable channel that existed in the world called The Box. I don't know if anyone remembers it. And it was a music sort of like DJ. So you basically you're texting your number and you say, I want to watch this song, and it would play the music video for you, right? So just queue up music videos and you watch them, yeah.
Oh, you used to be able to do that on Kerrang as well.
There you go. Unfortunately, that meant that if you put it in, you had to sit and wait for everyone else's crap to play. And in 1994, one of the things that showed a lot was a song called Original Sin by Taylor Dane, if anyone remembers Taylor Dane. Mm-hmm. Wasn't a very good song, but it was the soundtrack song to the 1994 film The Shadow, which I will go for what it was based on in a minute, because not a lot of people know about The Shadow. Here they are if you're watching. Or look at my big hardback The Shadow book, who has become someone that I absolutely fell in love with, completely and utterly, because of the first format it appeared in. But at the time I watched it, and I didn't even watch it at the cinema. I saw the adaptation. Of course, it had loads of scenes from the film as the 80s kind of, the 90s adaptations of of music videos did. They would show bits of the film in it, and I'd be like, that looks really cool. And I found a video cassette of it in John Menzies with incredibly awful cover art, which someone had kind of like licked onto the page. They put Crown on their tongue and gone, yeah. Yes.
What's a John Menzies?
It's a shop.
Right.
I didn't cut open a man called John Menzies and find inside him the mutilated copy of the Shadow video cassette. And it's a film. It stars Alec Baldwin. We won't mention him anymore because obviously he's in the spoiler room. We don't want to go into that. And it's awful. It's a really, really shit film. The plot is pretty meanderingly bad. The bad guy, who is the bad guy from the Shadow stuff, who's Shiwan Khan, the last living descendant of Genghis Khan, is badly acted. And he wants to be American. It's very strange. But it does also have the incredible acting talents that save the show of Ian McKellen and Tim Curry. And Tim Curry is being the best villain he could ever be. So the show is, just perfect because Tim Curry's in it. And I thought this is awful. This is truly, truly bad. But the Shadow. Do you even know who the Shadow is?
Yeah.
Cool,
Absolutely
right?
not.
So he's like a 1920s detective pulp noir kind of dude, but he has superpowers. He's like he can obscure the minds of men so they don't see him or remember him or whatever. He shoots guns everywhere, and he has mesmerism-like powers where he can like look into your eyes and make you stare at his ruby crystal. And you kind of like. No, not a euphemism. He's got a big ring. I mean, on his finger, and he makes you like you have to obey him and stuff when he waves the ring at you. And to me, this was very much in the vibe of the vampires from Vampire the Masquerade, Malkavian skills. So I thought I'm going to play Malkavian. When I got the other chance to play Vampire, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to play this dude. And it's very pulp, so it's set in like New York, I think, and it's set in the 1920s, but it never really kind of indicates that. So it's all the big kind of 1920s cars. It's got that very, was it Warren Beatty when he's in, I forgot the film, the big talking watch and he's a detective.
Back to the Future?
No.
Inspector Gadget.
No, I'll worry about that later. It's not on anymore. The film that he's in, and I can't remember what it's called. Holly will look it up for me. Is no one else could ever have the rights to it because the producer that made the film basically tried to dick Warren Beatty over, so he kept the rights personally, and every amount whenever it's about to tick over and run out, he makes
he did one recently last year or something, didn't he?
Yeah, he makes a really bad film, so no one else can get the rights to it.
Is it called?
It's not Dick Tracy, is it?
It is Dick Tracy.
It is Dick Tracy. There you go.
A
So
Warren
Dick
Beatty
Tracy
communicator watch from Dick Tracy. Yeah.
Big cars, that kind of stuff, and it's all very grainy and stuff. And one of my favourite things about it is that he's got like little gadgets, and he's got a driver that drives him around who can drive anything. Who is a ghoul when I play Vampire. There's a guy that sits in the middle of his base, deep underground, and he's got loads of tubes that come in front of him like a great organ. And they just send those like kind of pneumatic tubes out into space. They go all the way through the city, and they send messages backwards and forwards. There's thousands of them. It's completely improbable. But
That sounds bonkers.
But it's great. It's really pulp noir. I loved it. It really appealed to me. I wanted to run a whole kind of role-playing game based around this thing that I was watching for the first time ever. He's got these really wacky code phrases where he kind of goes up to it and says, the sun is shining, and they reply with, but the ice is slippery, and that's how they know that they're like kind of shadow agents that work for the Shadow. And in the real world, he's William Charrington. I know he's not William Charrington, but he's I can't remember his name. Lamont Cranston. Whatever. And it's his whole backstory.
By any chance? Would he be a millionaire in real?
He is. Yeah. Yes, he's a millionaire. So I kind of.
Batman, then.
Well, I'll come to that in a minute because, like, I eventually got to the late 90s, and my friend Josh, and if Josh, you're listening to this at any point, thank you very much for giving me the comic book I just showed you. He was like, look at this, and I was like, fuck, it's a comic. I didn't even know it was a comic. I just assumed it was a crap film. I read this comic, and I found out so much about the Shadow because, like, when I tried to do a deep dive on him in the 1990s, like, I think I got the idea that he was a comic, but like the internet was only a year old, and it was just full of porn, so it was hard to get much going on. So I'd kind of forgotten about him, but a bit more of a deep dive in the late 90s, and I discovered that my absolute hero with his two guns, his two pistols, and his big hat and his red mask over his face had been a comic book before he'd been on TV. And I did a bit more lead down it, and it turns out that he started off in the 1930s. In fact, in in 1930, I think. He appears as a radio show. So he's a radio show in the 1930s, and he's like, the concept is that he is a radio show narrator of mystery, and he's like kind of doing this big, deep in the city of New York, crime is afoot, the weed of crime bears bitter fruit kind of thing. And he's there doing this whole kind of like, you got a lot of noise kind of accent and stuff. And it's Orson Welles, right? So Orson Welles is doing The Shadow in the 1930s. And they're like, we fucking love this. So they turn him into, he jumps into comics, and he goes back to radio, then there's a bunch of movie serials, then there's a television pilot, then he goes on to LPs, and he's on CDs, and he's back to books, and he goes back onto radio, and eventually he leads all the way to this Hollywood-style film in '94. And he's been through all these kind of formats, and no one knows who he is. Like, I talk to loads of people about The Shadow, and only a very few people know about him. But when they do, they do. You know, he's really kind of important. And then you realise that, like, the influence he's had throughout these mediums, he is the print for Batman. Like, the guys that designed Batman, they've openly said, yeah, we saw The Shadow, and, like, you know, that he's one of the... You know, he predates Batman as a comic. Batman's like 9 years older than The Shadow. And, you know, Alan Moore said he was like one of his big influences for V for Vendetta, which is cool. And if you've ever seen Darkwing Duck, he is the Shadow, right? So, and you, Mark, Fallout 4, you played Fallout 4, right?
Yeah.
You know the quest centered around the Silver Shroud?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that
yes,
radio
that's
star.
him.
Yeah.
That's the Shadow, the masked crime-fighting detective from the radio shows. So he's been everywhere, and he's influenced all of these and he's been in and out of all the different mediums. And I've kind of actually traced him backwards through this line from this really bad film.
So interestingly, out of the three of us, I'm the only one who encountered the thing in its original format. Because Holly, you got the movie first, and you got the music.
I'd have to be very old to have listened to him in the 1930s, but yeah.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
I didn't actually listen to the CDs. Are probably one of the last things. I got hold of like the whole Shadow narrative on a bootleg CD that someone sent me in about 2003, and I listened to it. And they're only like sort of 8-minute episodes, some of them, you know, and but there's like thousands of them crammed onto one CD, and I got to listen to them in this really great, listening back, you know, for almost 100 years of time, to Orson Welles putting out these stories that, like, you know, probably a couple of thousand people listen to, but enough to be picked up to become a comic, and enough to be picked up to become a TV, like a 10 reel TV show kind of thing. And I think watching that journey has been, you know, historically finding out about this journey and where the Shadow has been and what his influence and stuff was just like, I was captivated. I was absolutely drawn into the whole story of him.
That's the really cool thing, though, right? Is like, no matter where you start in that chain, whether you start at the beginning or somewhere in the middle or right at the very end of you know, like of an adaptations list of adaptations. It can take you to different places in time. You can literally be a time traveler along the trajectory of that piece of literature or that movie or that character. You can see them in all of their different contexts. So you can see sort of, you know, how, because I can only imagine that, you know, like the original sort of, you know, radio plays and things were all very kind of RP and, you know, very sort of, you know, British and and, you know, and how that then turned into a movie with Alec Baldwin in it is just an incredible development.
Awesome to Alec Baldwin. It's just a bit of a plummet, but
it's just incredible. It's
interestingly enough, Orson Welles was a Shadow, big superhero dude. He was also his last appearance was Transformers the movie, and he was Unicron, the bad guy. But yeah, it's very much. I don't know if you guys ever watched. I mean, Mark probably. I must have watched like, you know, the old black and white serials for Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers in the 20th century.
I came across them, although not whilst they were originally being broadcast.
No, I watched them in like the early 80s when they were like what the BBC thought would be a cool thing to show kids.
Yeah, I mean, Buster Crab and...
Yeah, Johnny Weissmuller and stuff.
Yeah, and sort of spaceships on strings with spiders.
And the concept in the 1930s that there wasn't an atmosphere, you know, just kind of, you flew through. It was very strange. But that stuff, Holly, that's kind of what it reminded me of when I was listening to it on the radio. It had this kind of big pulp vibe going on. It's very good.
I think I've been getting it confused. Every time you talk about the Shadow, I think I've been thinking of something else.
The Phantom?
Because there's the Phantom, because there's that terrible, terrible Phantom movie with the horse that just if the horse wasn't there, everybody would. Yeah, I can't even remember.
Catherine Zeta-Jones' big breakout film.
It was. And I very distinctly remember the horse, because the horse was like the Deus Ex Machina. If the horse hadn't been there, then everything would have gone really horribly wrong. And why was it on that island? Why was it there by itself?
I'm on a horse.
Who knows?
But yeah, so yeah, for me, the Shadow was incredible. I think the uniqueness of it. I mean, around that time as well, the films like Dark City were coming out. You remember those films?
Yeah, that's
I love Dark City.
And I couldn't. Obviously, that's a unique standalone film, but because they come out at the same time, I presume they had the same background. They didn't have the same kind of background. It was incredible. I love the underdog feel of it. It wasn't a big. He never did anything. He's a time capsule from the 1930s that survived till now. Just bobbing along behind all the other big guys, and I think I love him more than any other crime fighting hero kind of guy, because he's an underdog. He survived. He's just a little dude. There you go. That was my one, and we're running out of time a little bit. So.
Oh, that's sad though, because I could talk about this for ages.
We will.
Absolutely
we can
ages.
certainly talk about it, next week. And we will. We need to kind of. Just touching on a few things that we spoke about today, particularly War of the Worlds, which it deserves its own pod if we're going to talk about things that have changed, how the changing of format of stuff that we've watched and how that spreads into the world. Taking things like The Shadow, who became like a radio play, became a film, how that affects the world around it in each journey of its existence. That's important, and obviously the biggest one probably was War of the Worlds, because of what it did when it was released and read aloud.
And also,
but
sorry, go on.
Holly's bursting. Look.
No, you can look at it the other way around as well, and that's the really cool thing, right? You can look at how the different adaptations had an effect on the world around them, but you also can look at how the world was at that period in time affected like how that adaptation was made, why it was made, in what format it was made. You can look at all of these things, and you're really right. When War of the Worlds first came out, and it absolutely terrified people because they didn't realize it wasn't real.
Spoilers.
Well, again, statute of spoilers has really run out on War of the Worlds. But you can look at things like, that, and you can almost see that coming full circle, right? Because misinformation and disinformation is so completely rife in everything that we encounter these days with with social media all over the place, that it would be really easy. It would be much easier to do that again now than it would just as the internet was dawning. And I mean, that's the anthropology nerd in me, though, because I love a bit of social, historical, and
No, absolutely.
I love context.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how movies, especially sci-fi movies, like through the 50s and 60s and all that, how they are directly reflecting the zeitgeist in the in society at the time. The atomic bomb and the communist threat and all of those, I think sci-fi especially becomes a vehicle which you can just go, we'll explore these worries at the moment. And currently it's climate change.
Social narrative, it's important. Well, there you go. That's going to have to be us. We are almost out of time, but we try and stick around an hour, because that's about the amount of time that people take walking their dogs or something, apparently, or whatever it is that people do when they're doing podcasts. I do the washing up and kind of get my dinner. I listen to my podcast while I'm doing dinner, basically, and the little tasks in the kitchen, because I'm trying to do them while I'm working. I can't do anything. But yeah, that is us. Next week, I think we'll carry on looking at what media changes have worked for us and why, and we might explore a little bit of the zeitgeist that Mark was talking about and how that's affected things. What has inspired us, and why we think you might love that. But we'll also be moving through the gears a little bit. Maybe not next week, maybe the week after, but we're going to start moving through the gears towards a post-apoc kind of genre special. Which will be coming up before, well, the best time to do is be coming up before the end of July, because at the end of July we will be live at the Fantasy Forest on stage, talking to people. So we'll tell you more about that as it comes up. But we're in a post-apocalyptic camp where we'll be raising Mark up a flagpole where he can dangle from a great height and shout about the world. He looks impressed.
Yeah, but I mean, that's exactly what my plan was. Just sit on the flagpole
Wonderful.
and scream at people.
But
I'm glad we're all on the same page.
If you, gentle listener, want to ask my many voices again, want to ask any questions, know more about upcoming live events, or just join in, give us suggestions, whatever you want to do, click on the link in our podcast description wherever you're listening to it, and join our Discord, which will definitely be available by the time you hear this. It's just starting up, but we'll be building it as the community grows. And if you want to get involved with what we're doing, if you want to suggest books that we can talk about at the moment, because that's our shtick at the moment, we'll move on. We'll move on to other things, so don't hang around. That's the place to do it. And if you could leave us a review, that would also be grand. So it is a goodbye from me, goodbye me, and Holly.
It's goodbye from me.
And Mark.
Farewell and adios.
Free goodbyes, thrice goodbye. Have an amazing week. Much love.
Bye.
You have been listening to A Geek Tragedy with me, Plague Mantle, and my best friend, the excellent Holly Properly, and our actually famous guy, Mark Cordory. If you like this, there is plenty more at patreon.com/A Geek Tragedy. Production is by Kit Brutnell. Our logo and artwork is by markcordory.com. Music is by Borislaw Kozielski. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Geek Tragedy. Email us at geektragedypodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe, leave us a rating and a review. And don't forget to tell all your geeky friends. Also, a big shout out to all of our genius geeks. We adore each and every one of you. And of course, much love. Take care of each other.